Despite initial optimism that trailed the privatization a few years ago of the downstream subsector of Nigeria's power sector, electricity supply continues to be epileptic. The mindless of this situation, the government, which continues to play the role of regulator and competitor at the same time, has effected a substantial increase in tariff, leaving many Nigerians in the unenviable position of having to continue paying for a commodity they claim they hardly enjoy. Joining us now from our Rise Abuja studio to assess the current situation with a view to proffering solutions and making suggestions is Beks Dagogo-Jack, a civil engineer, technocrat, public servant, and former chairman of the Nigerian Presidential Task Force on Power. Welcome to the program, Engineer Dagogo-Jack. Good to have you again on the morning show. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And to your team, I want to say thank God for keeping us alive over this pandemic. Our prayers for the family of those who lost their dear ones. And we are really appreciative that we're alive.
Well, thank you, Engineer Dagogo-Jack. But very quickly, what's your assessment of how well the post-privatization period in the power sector has fared thus far?
I would say it's been fits and starts. I would say over the last couple of months, probably a year, we're beginning to see signs that should be encouraging. Most of the metrics that you would use to measure progress in any post-privatization setting are looking upwards. Supply levels are not degrading. Revenue situation is improving. We've hit the 60 billion monthly revenue threshold, and we see it going up from there. Collection efficiency is ramping up beyond 60% from the last NEC report. System collapses have reduced drastically. All of these point towards what we have said repeatedly, that post-privatization, there should be very strong government presence for nurturing it until we get to a cruising speed. That was not quite understood. It has been understood, and there's been a lot of government close marking, quote unquote, not 100% as I would like it, but there's more government attention to the process than was the case a few years back. And we are all seeing the benefits of that.
In terms of critical areas...
It is not yet Uhuru, so we still have a gap.
Sir. I thought you had finished speaking because you paused.
Sorry, go ahead.
In terms of critical gap areas, what are your observations and prescriptions going forward?
I think that we haven't done enough so far as metering penetration is concerned. There's been slightly more rhetoric about the 6 million meters to be assembled in Nigeria. But what is critically missing, in spite of, apart from project clarity, is information, is data, is regular briefing. I think the Ministry of Power can do a lot more to bring data out that people can measure. If you look at metering, we're not getting where we should be. We need data to know how well we are doing on metering. If you look at, say, the estimated billing issue, it is something that we must give a timeline and say, no, it's going to sunset now. We can't continue beyond that level. There are a few other areas, critical areas that we should look at. If you look at off-grid has taken a space in our market. And it is a critical space because on-grid is going to struggle with infrastructure investments. Off-grid can bring electricity to the homes probably faster. We need to begin to treat off-grid as a business of its own, provides its own regulatory framework, how investors access it and all that. I think that that is another critical step that is waiting for us to chew.
I'm excited you talked about off-grid because that's what I'm passionate about. And off-grid are mostly renewables in this sector. And they've been able to bridge the gap, to underserviced areas like the villages and some other areas that don't even have public power. How can we use the off-grid system to be able to harmonize and allow for the shortfalls? Because there are massive shortfalls. The grid system is weak. And it's not only here. grid system is weak everywhere in the world. The American grid system is shoddy too, right? So it's not a sustainable system in the long run. To pack everything on one grid and ensure that it goes smoothly, you definitely have a lot of system collapse. So how can we use off-grid, renewable energy, and those partnerships to be able to, vitalize the villages with energy? Because it's needed at this point in time.
I agree with you totally. I have said it, that we focus too much of the policy. If you look at the Electricity Power Sector Reform Act, focus too much of the policy around on-grid. But having started the journey, we realized that we left out a major space that could have been brought into the mix, which is the off-grid. It needs its own incentive structure. It needs its own promotional agenda. It needs its own political will support, some of which we have seen in different symbolic ways. If you look at the REA, the Rural Electrification Agency, and a few steps they've taken. But we can do 200 times what REA is doing if it is set up for private sector to move into that space, take their different small niches, and move on from there. Everywhere else, even in the US, there are a lot of off-grid solutions that nobody talks about, and they eventually become net suppliers. I will give an example of, down the line, what I think the private sector should do. The private sector hasn't done enough, if you ask me. Over time, they've behaved like spoiled children. The government will give them foreign exchange for nothing. Bank of Industry will give them soft loans and all that. So they just wait. Look at Nesco in Jos. Nesco is 80-year-old. Yeah. Is probably one of the earliest IPPs. It's a net supplier of power, and it's an industry. Imagine there are 200 Nescos in Nigeria. We will have less crisis in the power sector than we have now. So those are some of the forward thinking that I expect happening.
Well, two major steps are taken with regard to stakeholder interest, say in the last 1 year, the metering program. What do you think of that in terms of progress that has been made and how that has been processed? And then secondly, the intervention of the CBN with regard to collection, when it was said that, look, these investors will pay directly, to bridge that gap between the discos and, the payments that they have to make.
Yes, those are, if you like, fine-tuning of policy in the operational field. The CBN didn't wake up overnight to say you have to send your money here. They had guaranteed and issued a lot of loans, one way or the other, or aid, whichever way you look at it, to keep the market going. And they have to find a way of stopping that if there was some kind of irresponsibility at the disco level in repatriating funds based on the agreements, based on the contracts. If you're supposed to bring 45% of revenue to the center, you must do that. You can't come up with excuses. So CBN stepped in, and I think it was the right move to more or less plug the leakages and hold them directly accountable, because they know they can't do a lot of business in this country with a CBN sanction over their head. That also probably explained why the revenue performance has started improving.
Yeah, metering.
For the metering, for metering, I had alluded to it earlier on. There must be a lot of clarity on project plan and methodology in the public space, so people can also say, no, do it this way or don't do it this way. But the general gist is, there is a policy to manufacture 6 million meters, roll them out, and all that. But I think we have an ownership lacuna. Who is owning this project? Who is reporting on it? Who is communicating to the public? Where is accountability? Where do people who have concerns go to? And that shouldn't be too much of a problem, especially if the ministry, for instance, decides to have a dashboard, which many other public sector institutions with a lot of industry relationship like power do. You establish a dashboard, and all the data that anybody wants to see is migrated there on a weekly or so basis. And you can go there. If you don't like something, you can you can do something about it. But we don't have a lot of data transmission from within the sector corridor into the public domain. And you can't make comments without those kinds of data.
That's a great point, sir. So this dashboard, plugging all the lacunas, to what extent is the Ministry of Power responsible for that? And what else would you like to see the Ministry of Power do in terms of reform? And I also wanted to talk to you about the plan that President Buhari just launched about gas and how he expects that gas will power Nigeria's economy by 2030. We have a country where, our electricity problems, our electricity challenges are blamed on low supply of gas. To what extent do you think that that will help?
Oh, it would help a lot, but I'll start from the ministry. Yes, the ministry can do a lot, a whole lot in changing the climate around the sector. As we speak now, I can almost categorically state that the sector is not attracting up to 15% of the total investment that it needs to sustain growth. And that's a very low percentage anywhere you consider it. But that is so because investment, thrive on information, data that they can analyze and projections that they can make. So the less we hear of what is going on as policy, the less anybody is inclined to jump in and take a space. So information from the Ministry of Power, credible information regularly, it's very important. For instance, ministry should mastermind regular exchange of ideas by the experts in the public, in the view of the public, where experts are coming to ask questions and exchanging ideas regularly, not once in a while. I think that there should be a transition from the mindset that the ministry is essentially a project delivery vehicle where projects are awarded and delivered. No, the ministry is a sector promotion agency. You want investors to see your sector as the bride of the system. And you have to take certain steps, and they are looking at your footsteps. So we are not doing enough of those kinds of movements, those maneuvers that bring investors confidence to rally into our space. And if we don't do that, we can have the Presidential Power Initiative delivered, and we suddenly realize that we don't even have enough generation, but we fix the problem in transmission and distribution. So it's something that you must be holistically managing step by step.
All right, that brings me to my next question, and great insight you shared there. The problem has always been, people are generating power, but to take the power and distribute is the problem. Some of the off-takers don't even want to take it. One, because they say they have not been paid for the ones they have taken before. And two, they don't just have space to be able to take it under their scheme. And it brings back that problem of our grid system, that when you finally load up all this power in the grid, there's a shutdown, there's a system collapse because of the faulty nature of the grid itself. One, how do we fix that? Two, there was something that jumped up in me when you mentioned NETCO. Because NETCO is a classical case of the fact that things can really work in this country. But why is it that NETCO keeps working? And if you remember, NETCO was built around the same time we had Ijora B power station, same in the 20s in this country. But look at Ijora. Ijora is a relic of itself, doesn't churn out power any longer. NETCO still does, and it still uses the processes it used since then to churn out power. So should we build individual centers of excellence across board in the country to be able to fill up the gap? Or we should go through this long bureaucratic drudgery system that never gives us power in the end? You'll take all this insight after this quick commercial break. We'll come back to it. All right, welcome back. We still have Beks Dagogo-Jack, a civil engineer, technocrat, public servant, former chairman of Nigeria Presidential Task Force on Power. I did ask two questions. I asked about, the grid system, taking power. The ones we're even producing, if we're doing like close to 5,000 megawatt threshold, they can't take it because of the grid system. And there's a lot of power that goes to waste. And the ground rule about energy can't be created nor destroyed. You have to keep constantly recycling it. And that's the ground rule about energy. But we've had problems, with our grid system. Recently, we had the system collapse a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure by the end of the year, we'll have had 50 or hundreds of system collapses, as is always the case. Secondly, I'm talking about the fact that should we just build centers of excellence in every part of the country that can have sort of like IPP schemes and churn out power and regulating themselves, and also ensure that there's some level of cost reflective tariff to be able to run it, because that's the model NETCO runs. And I'm also asking, why is it that Ijora B, that was built about the same time NETCO started in Jos in the 1920s, and NETCO was built to be able to service the teen industry in Jos in the 1920s. Today, Ijora B is nowhere to be found. NETCO is still running.
Thank you. Very, very pointed questions. Starting with the misalignment in the value chain, the supply chain. That was speaking directly to how the sector was managed as a vertically integrated government monopoly, where chief executives can be sacked overnight on radio, didn't have to be the best on the track. We have gone past that. To the extent that at that time, I could be planning a generation project because that's what my boss wants to plan, but he hasn't bothered if it is properly aligned with a transmission willing capacity. It's not his problem because he's just micro-focused on the generation side. And then the other one is promoting a transmission project, but no handshake with the generation, and there is no handshake with the distribution, which will eventually be the last off-taker. These are some of the reasons why there was so much passion to take government out of that business. A lot of people misunderstood it and thought, oh, you're going to give wealth to individuals and all that. A lot of mischaracterization, but it was just that we were not getting it right. And if you look at NESCO and Ijora, it speaks to the fact that government cannot do such businesses well. Ijora was working very well in the 20s. It was practically the only light that anybody could depend on. But as soon as it became a government business, as soon as it became a NEPA and PHCN, bingo, all the problems came up. They can't do the maintenance, they can't ensure reliability, and it was a small project. So if it was going to die, it's easier for it to die than anything else, the way government processes its things, because they think they have another plant somewhere they can use in Benin or something and flying the power into Lagos, so why worry about this? But this is how public sector normally approaches business. It's a good thing we're taking public sector out of it. So going forward, like you said, the private sector knows how to scale. You don't teach private sector to build a big warehouse in a village. They will not do it. They'll build a small shop. So the private sector knows how to scale, and it's in scaling that you have off-grid solutions, mini-grid solutions, on-grid solutions, all sorts of mix. Because I know somebody in India, a friend of mine, who has hydro solutions. It doesn't do anything more than 2 megawatts. And in its portfolio, he has about 250 megawatts as I speak to you. Wherever he sees a small body of water, he puts in a dam and collects 10 kilowatts, whatever he collects, aggregates them, sells into the community for farming and stuff like that. So basically, it is just to create the template for private sector to move around and look for opportunities and take risks. We didn't do that. We made it an exclusive list. You cannot even go and talk about doing any business there when it's an exclusive list. So all of this needs to be toned down and changed so that the locked up energy that Nigerians have, we go outside, we're superstars. We can do it here, but you need to unlock the system for those energies to express themselves.
Well, earlier on you talked about the rural electrification project, and there's actually a rural electrification agency. What's your assessment of the progress that has been made so far in that regard, in terms of ensuring electricity supply penetration? And if you were to be made a Minister of Power of Nigeria, I'm hypothesizing now, what are those steps, imperatives, that you put on the table, and what kind of timelines will you define for the country to ensure that electricity supply penetration?
Okay, let me start with rural electrification. Basically, it's been taking steps in the right direction, especially because there has been some kind of vacuum at different levels, vacuums for better service. So REA saw that vacuum and stepped in to provide solutions. not all of the solutions look sustainable, and that's the word I want to use carefully. Because for as long as REA models any kind of risk falling back to government beyond, say, 10 or 15% risk ownership by government, you kick in other issues. Are those projects going to be sustainable? Where is the cash flow? How do you make sure that it doesn't turn to become a white elephant downstream? And these are not problems that cannot be solved. So first and foremost, they are on the right track. It needs to be strengthened. The vision needs to be more articulated so we know we're not just getting short-term glory and long-term, we're back to square one. That's so far as REA is concerned. On the other point, which you have made repeatedly, you have to run for election as president, Dr. Abati, so you can choose who you are going to make the Minister of Power. At that time, you may consider me. But basically, I don't have to be Minister of Power to throw out ideas that the system can accept and use. In that respect, for instance, I have repeatedly said that when we did the transition, when the privatization was done, all of us realized, anybody who was being honest with themselves, realized that some of the disco territories were unwieldy. If you look at Enugu, it's probably about 5 states. If you look at Port Harcourt, it's 4 states. It was known that those were the structures we inherited from the vertically integrated public company, monopoly that was managing it. So there was a strong appetite that down the stretch, those territories will be reviewed and unbundled into state-level discos at the least. This will increase efficiency because they will know their customers closer than they currently do. Some of them have their office, Enugu will have his office in Enugu, and he goes as far as Aba to serve customers. We know limitations in Nigeria, and we should say the truth. So I definitely would like to review the disco territories, see whether we can have them in smaller bunches. Again, when we are able to unbundle and release the other components to other investors, we bring in more capital, we bring in more technology, bring in better players, better coverage of customers. I will spend time doing that. I would like to establish an off-grid market, promote it as a market of its own, so people can go in there and do whatever business they want to do. I would like to have a renewable energy laboratory. I'm not sure we have something like that. I've heard different agencies call different things. I look into their profile. I don't see a lot because a laboratory is supposed to churn out solutions, even if at the level of prototype. It should be funded so we can deal with all the raw materials around us and begin to look how are we going to get the next level of energy in a small scale and sell it to people who are interested in doing that kind of business. I will personally insist that we do prepaid metering in the first scale to cover all public institutions, police, army, ministry, everything, schools, universities. They should not use electricity when there is no credit on their meter. Now, if we do that, the revenue profile will change dramatically. And from there, you begin to have the level of liquidity that the market needs. I would like the
Engineer Dagogo-Jack, we're really interested in these suggestions, and I hope that the relevant authorities are listening. But let's take a quick commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News channel. Our guest is still Engineer Beks Dagogo-Jack, civil engineer, technocrat, public servant, and a former chairman of the Nigerian Presidential Task Force on Power. Thank you for staying with us, Engineer Dagogo-Jack. Before we went on that break, you were making a number of suggestions, and I found very interesting your suggestion that even government departments, agencies, and ministries, including the police and the Nigerian Army, should be made to get prepaid meters so that they don't just use free electricity. But please carry on.
Yes, I also think, Dr. Abati, that we must have a disciplined way to add capacity to our national energy bucket. It must be disciplined. We can say 2021 we target to have 100 megawatts. You don't need to be too fantabulous or exaggerated in your programming. But if you say 100 megawatts, you have walked back from that figure to how much will come from solar, how much will come from natural gas, how much will come from nuclear, if at some point nuclear becomes accepted as one of our sources of energy, hydro. If we don't have, say, a 3 to 5 year plan on how we want to add capacity into the national energy bucket, it's so difficult to even say you are measuring performance. What are you measuring performance against? So I think that it's important we embrace that process, especially because of how critical power is to everything else. Even in telecoms, I can tell you, and all of us know this, it's not new, that if we got our energy right, telecom cost will come slightly lower. Most of them are running their towers on generator on diesel, and we know the cost of diesel. So if they can be migrated into a lower cost energy pricing, they will pass that cost over to us, and everybody will pay less at the end of the day, even for telephones. We're not talking about transportation, the impact on transportation. It's everywhere, it's pervasive. So if we get power right, we get everything right. Now, how do we say, if I ask anybody in 2022, what are we going to add on our grid? And somebody gives me a figure, he will walk it back to say, this will come from source A, this will come from project B, this will come from project C. And I can do an assessment and say, yeah, this makes sense. But for as long as we don't want to discuss that, and whatever drops we take, we can't run a predictable economy, we can't attract investment into our system, because they use structure to do analysis and take decisions. So those are some of the things that I would like to change, or I would like to be changed, even if I am not the one to change it.
Well, I also appreciated your ministerial agenda, hypothetical though it may be, until Dr. Abati becomes president of Nigeria. Very important. Thank you for sharing that today. And it just underlines the fact that Nigeria does not have an energy policy. We just operate in a very sort of ad hoc manner. I want you to address that point as well. And also Infraco, with its 1 trillion naira seed capital for funding of roads, railway, and power plants. How would you like to see that fund dispersed in the power sector?
Yeah, we are glad to have funds express confidence in our market. They have the underlying statistics. They have the data. They know that the gap between supply and demand is huge, and that is an opportunity anywhere else. They struggle with how we do business and how we can do business better. But again, a lot of them have taken a jump into our economy. So it now dovetails to us, especially, and I'll go back to why I was almost talking down on the organized private sector. It comes down to them organizing themselves in a way to access these funds in a credible manner and to give confidence to the fund managers that this is a safe place to do business. But I know that I will spend 50% of that fund on power, and the rest others can share from that pool, because I know the multiply effect of getting power right. I think you mentioned something else, which was an energy policy, is it? Yeah. Now, with energy policy, basically, yeah, like I said, has to do with statements of intention that is clear to everybody to see, to feel, to measure, and to take back. Now, that's a very important platform for even measuring performance. So without clear energy policy instruments that have been made public, that people can feel, touch, and measure, it's not likely that you will have enough incentive to stay on the track. And that is one of the areas I have issues with.
Okay, real quickly, because I know we're wrapping up things very soon. I want to talk about gas. It's all been said that this is the decade of gas, but people can't get gas. I think it was last year, the federal government brought out a scheme where people could bid for gas being flared to be trapped and be used. We've not heard how that has gone. Maybe the bid process is still on. I think the bid process must have been concluded now. what is the case with that? Why is it that we cannot effectively use gas to our own advantage and we just flare it? And you talked about nuclear. Goodness me, that tickles my fancy, because a lot of all these companies are doing great things with nuclear, out of Niger. They are putting out, nuclear plants out of Niger, shipping the power. Some are doing renewable in Niger, and they're shipping the power out of France. And it's amazing what they're doing with all of this, technologies across board. Why is that not the case in Nigeria? Why don't we even have a nuclear plant, for instance? The UK is building Hinkley Power Plant. It's a nuclear plant. It's a big plant. Why are we not having capital spending and investment like that in Nigeria at this point in time?
You are so right. You're so right. As an observer, as a stakeholder, as somebody who is interested in analyzing the sector, I also come to the same frustrating question. So much so because we are supposed to be the leading light so far as even if I limit it to West African economy, we're a leading light. We have the energy base. I'm talking about human capital. We have the base. We are not indigent, so to speak. So we can take risks. We can experiment. Nuclear has been advanced to the level where you can have a 50 megawatt, as small as a 50 megawatt nuclear plant. So it is at that stage where investment appetite ought to aggressively go in there. But I think you asked one or two questions before that. You talked about gas.
Yes.
Now, with the issue of gas, issue of gas is almost similar to what happened to the electricity sector. It is the preponderant control and ownership of government that removes the innovation and the sense of enterprise that should be attached to an asset as valuable as gas. It took government forever to treat gas as an asset. It was the crude oil which they could sell immediately that was interesting to them. That's just the way government thinks. But there was gas. They were ready to flare it so far as crude oil was bringing enough money. I mean, I think it was the government of late Sani Abacha, may so rest in peace, that said, no, I have to get an LNG. And he put the money down, the Nigerian equity down, and said, you guys, Shell, everybody bring your money. This is your timeline. You have to give me Bonny LNG. And everybody is celebrating the success of that process. So again, government should ask themselves, how far should we be engaged in releasing the gas energy into the Nigerian economy? Where should we stop and where should private sector come in? How do we make them come in? What signals do they need? So a lot of consulting, conferencing, stakeholder discussions, not this sense sometimes we get, those of us who are citizens and observers, that even when we have adopted gas as the next stage of our economic prosperity, if you like, because we have the raw material, government is likely to design that process almost exclusively feeling that it knows everything. And you end up finishing the design and you don't have the traction that you're supposed to have. And we've done that over, all of us are culprits of it. I'm not trying to shift blames to anybody. We're all culpable. But now that we've learnt our lessons and we have fixed it in electricity by getting government out of the business of electricity, we can also get government out of the business of gas as much as is possible without violating the, if you like, the terminal ownership of that material being a government property. Through legislation, through taxation, through royalty designs, what have you, through the PIB, you can structure a scenario that allows gas to compete with crude, if not overtake crude oil. But these are decisions, institutional decisions, policy decisions that must be made faithfully and stuck with, not made for the good of the person who is there today, not minding what will happen tomorrow. You can't do business like that.
Well, earlier on, you referred to the Presidential Power Initiative. And under that, we have the federal government power company. We have the project with Siemens. And in 2021, there are supposed to be some deliverables. Have we seen some of those deliverables? And is it certain that by 2025, from phase 1 to phase 4, as defined, the partnership with Siemens that even led to the loss of a major government official when he went to pursue that, to finalize that in Germany. What kind of progress are we making? Very quickly.
Dr. Abati, I would really love to have shared as much as I have with you, but it's not enough, which is that where the contract is waiting to or currently undertaking pre-engineering studies. If we look at the fact that the project pretty much was kicked off 2 years back, as soon as our president took office, it was his first signature step. And a lot of people were excited, including me, that if the first step the president takes in his second term was to say, I don't want this darkness anymore, there is hope. You know, down the line, you can't call the president anymore because he is an institution. He has downloaded it to where technocrats, civil servants, public servants should drive it. But if we look at June or so, or July of 2019 to now, we're doing almost 24 months. And if we're still talking about pre-engineering studies, I think we've lost some valuable time, no matter how you want to shape it. That intervention I hear is about $3 billion, and that's a lot of money that could generally leapfrog the capacity, the transmission wheeling capacity, and the distribution uptake capacity by double figures. Now, you can imagine the impact of that on the economy. So nobody can shortchange, and I've spoken to this project a few times here, that it is a laudable agenda, but we need to report it on a platform, on a dashboard. You need to know how it is migrating from point to point. We need to know where the projects are, who is the receiving disco that is taking this project or that project. The less opaque the project is, the more confidence it will. And I'll tell you that, do you know that a typical government model where government sees investment as serious business, if government is ready to take the 3 billion chunk, they would like to get 20, 25, 30 cents on the dollar as additional investment inflow, piggybacking on this. Because if you know this is happening, as an investor, you can decide that you want to do this because, this is about to come in. That's how people take position in the economy. But if they don't know how things are happening, which project is going on, where it is, how do you tie in other projects to it? Because there are generation projects that are in the pipeline, frozen out, because they don't know what will happen if they produce their power. But if you know something is happening on transmission and distribution, you will open up your planning books and begin to shape out. So for me, it's information that is a major challenge going forward.
On that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Engineer Dagogo-Jack, for joining us on the morning show.